Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting with George Galloway and the Workers' Party of Britain. And our subject for tonight is Workers Need Fighting Unions. So over to you, George, if you're ready.
Thank you very much, Rob, and comrades of the Workers' Party on Zoom, and the members of the public who haven't yet joined us yet on all these other platforms. Before I turn to the subject in hand, Rob, I hope you'll permit me a slight digression to a subject which is not unadjacent to the subject we are scheduled to discuss, namely the union as opposed to unions. It's an interesting coincidence, but the word union, of course, comes from the self-evident truth that unity is strength, that we are stronger together than we would be separately. Now, the Workers' Party of Britain in Scotland has found itself this week, this last few days, right at the heart of the political debate in Scotland on the subject of separatism. And the position of the Workers' Party is very clear. Just like on Brexit, for us, this is an existential question. In other words, central to our project of uniting the working class people of this small island of ours, Britain, and making them a power in the land. And of course, it goes without saying that our project would be weakened, the working class movement would be weakened, and Scotland would be weakened, as well as England and Wales. All of us would be weakened if the country was broken up under the tawdry tinsel of bourgeois Scottish nationalism. This is not the moment to talk in detail about them, but there is much to be said. Suffice to say that however well they have done in recent years in the polls amongst working class people and amongst sections of the Scottish public that weren't with them before, they do not represent the interests of the working people of Scotland, quite the reverse. And we are unshakable in that resolve, and we intend to treat the Scottish Parliament elections next May, that's May of 2021, as effectively a referendum, because if the separatists win that election, win a majority in that election, then Scotland will never get off the hamster wheel of constitutional navel-gazing, which passes for politics in Scotland. We want politics in Scotland to be normal politics, class against class, interest against interest, spending against tax, public services, the police, the highways, tourism, fisheries, farming, all the issues that are virtually completely ignored by the political class in Scotland and its supine media echo chamber. And we believe that the Workers' Party programme will prosper in that kind of ideological battleground. But that means we have to dispense with the endless neverendum which the Scottish nationalists have visited upon the country. We were supposed to have a once-in-a-lifetime referendum in 2014. Then it got finessed to a once-in-a-generation. Well, a generation is 20 to 30 years. And within months of the decisive victory that we won in 2014, 55 to 45, which is decisive as referendums go in this country of late, within months of that result, the never-ending forces were demanding another. and no doubt another after that if necessary. So we want to put this issue to bed next May. To that extent, we will cooperate with other parties which reject the breakup of the country. Now, they may reject it for other reasons to us. They may have different reasons for supporting the union between Scotland, England, and Wales. That was true in the Brexit referendum also, of course. But as a matter of practical politics, we are ready to cooperate with other parties who stand against separatism in Scotland. And I have proposed a schema by which that cooperation could be facilitated. As yet, there is no response publicly from the bigger parties. We hope that there will be, and that doesn't have to be in public. We can talk about it in private first. And if they are watching tonight, I suspect they are, then we are ready for confidential discussions about a way forward in putting together an alliance that would defeat the SNP next May. If we cannot secure that cooperation, then within the limits, which are considerable, of our own size and strength and resources, we will do what we can ourselves, standing alone, to intervene in the May 2021 elections with, I hope, good effect. Certainly, if this last few days is anything to go by, we have one very much enhanced new audience in Scotland for our perspectives. And I hope that people will join the Workers' Party of Britain Scotland. I hope they'll at least follow our Twitter feed where you can stay in closer touch with us. So thank you, Rob, for allowing me to say that, because it is important to rebuilding the strength of the working class in Britain. And that's our purpose. That's our overarching goal. More important than any international issue, more important than any local issue, our central aim is to build working class power in this island. And we have plans as to how that can be done. And one of those is to rebuild the trade union movement. I am so old that I can recall when trade unions were a power in the land, when trade union leaders were more famous than any cabinet minister. Trade union leaders were more influential than any group of members of parliament. The late Alex Kitson, for example, who was a mentor of mine when he was the Deputy General Secretary of my union, then the Transport and General Workers Union, as was his wont, was planning out my life for me, and my political life at least. I said to him, you know, I'd quite like to go into Parliament. And he laughed and said, I'm giving you a plan that will leave you as the General Secretary of the Transport and General Workers Union before you're 45. And that's a much more important position than a mere member of Parliament. And he was right, of course. I don't know if that plan would have worked out, incidentally, but Alex had the retiral dates of everybody that stood in the way and had a clear pathway inked out for me. Maybe I should have taken it, I don't know. But the point I'm making is that once upon a time in my lifetime, not ancient history, the working class was highly organized in Britain, had one of the highest proportions of trade union membership amongst the working class of any country in the world. At its height, 14 million people were affiliated to the TUC. Our own union, the T&G, had 2 million members in the docks, in the transport industry, in the factories, in the public services. And those of you who've listened to my audiobook about the 1970s will, I hope, have been enthralled by the description I give there of the day that Britain had a general strike for a day. And that's all it took for a day to free the Pentonville Five, the 5 Pentonville dockers who had been imprisoned for disobeying Edward Heath's Industrial Relations Act. And the workers all over the country came out in support of these 5 dockers. And before the day was done, a largely mythical figure, a unicorn figure called the official solicitor, had been dredged from somewhere to show up at the Old Bailey and do the necessary paperwork to free the Pentonville Five. I joined the labor movement even before that. I was one of those fighting against Barbara Castle's in place of strife proposals to neuter or begin the neutering of the trade union movement under Harold Wilson's government in the 1960s. And my association with the trade union movement goes back that long, as does the association of many of the core leadership of the Workers' Party of Britain. I'm still a member of Unite, I suppose, one of its longest serving members. I joined on Christmas Eve of 1973. That's a long time in anybody's language. But I'm also an honorary member since 1982 of the National Union of Mine Workers, South Wales area, Mardy Lodge, and it's one of my proudest possessions. And the reason why the older among us were active in trade unions is obvious, that workers are stronger together than they can ever be separately. Now, we are in a situation in Britain where millions of people are currently being paid 80% of their wages by the state. That will not go on for very much longer. And as we are already seeing at British Airways and many other places, the employers are now seeking on a large scale to sack their workforce and re-employ them, though probably not all of them, at inferior wages and conditions. In some cases, vastly inferior wages and conditions. So millions of workers are going to vitally need a vibrant and strong trade union movement to defend their wages and conditions. And millions of workers are likely to be sacked permanently when this furlough ends in October, most probably. So Britain is going to have mass unemployment, mass underemployment, and a massive attack on pre-existing wages and conditions, all of which requires a proper trade union response. Now, I have said here before in these speeches, I don't wish to be churlish, but I am genuinely surprised and disappointed that the trade union leadership has not emerged over the last few months as a much more central, vocal, articulate player in the national debate. Me, with my single Twitter feed and my radio and television programs have had far more to say to far more people than the trade union leaders have been able to muster. Now, it may be that they are making pronunciamento that are not being picked up. In that case, they need to hire better public relations people, because an organization that represents a significant number of people, still nothing like the 14 millions of the 1970s, but still 6, 7, 8 million workers are in trade unions, ought to have been able to make a much more important intervention in the national debate than they have been doing throughout. So they are going to have to get their act together. And I have some suggestions in that regard. First of all, those of you who know your labor movement history will know of a man called Wall Hannington, who was the leader of the National Unemployed Workers Movement, the NUWM, in which people like us played a leading role. People like us were the cadre of that organization. And of course, I know that unemployed people can join unions, but I believe that there is a case now for the trade unions themselves to set up collectively an NUWM, because the demands of the unemployed are going to be central to the politics of the next few years. And if they're not, then the unemployed, millions of them, will be left to wither on the vine. And whilst withering, will be prey to be picked up and misused by forces of the far right in Britain. And if we are going to avoid that and going to organize the unemployed workers for positive and productive and progressive politics, then I believe the NUWM being recreated is an important step. Secondly, unions are going to have to get back to basics, to use a John Majorism. Far too many unions have allowed themselves to become, I don't know, like which, the consumer magazine, or what do you call them, a citizens advice bureau, a place where you can get better deals on your holidays, and you can even buy clothes and other things at a slightly reduced rate using the union's brochures and so on. I'm not against, of course, these things, but these are not the primary purposes of trade unions. The primary purposes of trade unions is to organize the workers and make them stronger, to resist any attempt to roll back wages and conditions of their members, and where possible, to advance, albeit inch by inch, to advance the interests of their members. Thirdly, the unions have to resurrect political education. Forgive me repeating myself, I've said this before, but in the 1970s, there was scarcely a weekend ever in which I was not engaged either as a speaker, more and more towards the end of the 1970s, but before that as a recipient of political education within the trade union movement. I'd go 1 month to the Salutation Hotel and sit at the feet, metaphorically, of Michael Magahe that I referred to last week, and learn things. And then as I grew older and more experienced, on my feet, teaching other workers things about how the economy works, about class, about ideology, about why we're in a labor movement, why we believe in socialism. I don't know. Obviously, I don't get invited anymore It may be that these things are still ticking along, but I doubt it. I certainly see no evidence of it. I don't look at people in 2020 and think, as I used to do all the time in the 1970s, that woman or that man has been attending the weekend schools, the summer schools of AUEW TAS, who had amongst the best political education in the country, or the RMT and so on, or NUR as it then was. I see no evidence of a politically conscientized cadre emerging in the working class that has been schooled in the education system of the trade unions. Fourthly, and this is more controversial, I think the wages being earned at the top of the trade unions today is a national scandal. We have now a gap between the wages being earned by the members and the wages being earned by the trade union leaders, which is many times more vast than ever existed when the unions were kings. And the unions were kings, and not in my own political lifetime. And something has to be done about that, because it has consequences, you know. Because if you yourself are exceedingly comfortable financially, then certain courses of action, certain stands that you might otherwise take are affected by that. I don't want to be too offensive, but if you're sitting on 150 or even 200,000 a year, while your members are on only a little more than a tenth of that, then your militancy is going to be slightly less vibrant than theirs. That is a truth self-evident, I would say. And then when you take into account some of the stories that you hear about multi-million pound payoffs in a certain union recently, which now is under a cloud, and investigations are going on, where the leader walks away, apparently inexplicably, having only recently been re-elected, with a gigantic package, a 7-figure package. This is quite wrong. And the property deals and so on that seem to go on at the top of the unions, sweetheart deals for houses and apartment and so on, all these things reduce the credibility of the trade union leaders and the trade union bureaucracy, make the unions less attractive. Now, I think you already know the extent to which I misapplied it actually last Sunday on Moats. I attributed it to Socrates. It is in fact Aristotle. I believe in the rubric that the richest of us should be no more than 3 times richer than the poorest of us. And that is a rubric I would commend to the trade union leaders. They should not be earning more than 3 times what the average wage of their own members is. And if they took that self-sacrifice, then they would send high voltage through their own members. They'd be sending a powerful message to their own members, and a powerful message to the working class, which for one reason or another is not yet or any longer in trade unions. And lastly, the trade unions have got to look at the extremely one-sided, beneficial relationship that they have with the miscalled Labour Party. The Labour Party is not worthy of the name Labour Party. This much is blindingly obvious. I think I told you about my experience in 1974 when I literally bumped into the leader of the Labour Party and the deputy leader, both standing on the steps of Congress House in Great Russell Street. Harold Wilson and Ted Short. I got them to sign my Labour Party card, which they happily did. None of that would happen now. The idea that a Labour leader, never mind the leader and the deputy leader, would both be in the TUC, or that they would sign, you can't sign a plastic card, unfortunately. And plastic, not just literally, but metaphorically. The Labour Party is robbing the unions and the members of the unions blind. It is taking millions of pounds from the trade unions and not only giving nothing in return, but actually betraying the interests of the working class in exchange for the money. At least Dick Turpin wore a mask and didn't pretend that he was the workers' friend when he was liberating you from your wallet or your handbag. So the relationship, the so-called political funds, I'm in favor of unions having political funds. Don't get me wrong. They need political funds to contribute to campaigns, to run their political education, and so on. But handing over millions of pounds to the Labour Party, when it's actually betraying the interests of the working class, is daylight robbery. And it is taking place in plain sight. So we call on union members to begin to raise inside the union movement the misuse of the members' money by the huge subventions to a Labour Party no longer worthy of the name. I'll close with this. All of our members, unless it is literally impossible for them to do so, should be in trade unions. Everyone we encounter, we should encourage to join the trade unions. Our people should be active in the trade unions so far as that is any longer possible, and I appreciate it's not as possible as it once was. The position of the Workers' Party is not conditional in this. Even if our union is ruled by, led by people who are, to say the least, a gigantic disappointment, we should still be in the union. We should be union men and union women. And people should look at us in the unions, in the workplace, with respect, even admiration, because of our conduct, because of our work, because of the clarity of our arguments, the way in which we work, our style of work. That's the way we will gain friends and influence people in the trade unions, in the working class. Happy to take questions, Rob. I hope that was a decent introduction.
Thank you very much, George. Yeah, that was great. I think you've drawn it right to the important point there, and also very good advice for our members about, how to approach this sort of work and how to conduct ourselves. Yeah, we've got a lot of hands up and contributions. I'm going to go to Claire first of all. You there, Claire?
Hello, Claire.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
yes.
Very well.
Okay,
Thanks.
okay, brilliant. Right, I've got some points here that I want to make, and my apologies if they kind of go off topic slightly, but I'm hoping I can bring it round if that's okay. I was reading, I'm in the NEU, and I was reading their magazine, Educate. And there was an article by Warwick Mansell about the current race, can you believe it, in a time of COVID? The current race to academise, despite the fact that heads and schools are struggling with just managing the school and whether they're going to have students in and so forth. And apparently the local government association are concerned that 594 further academies are in the pipeline. So the ideology of privatization trundles on completely regardless, in fact, probably benefiting by the distraction of the illness. It was interesting though that it's paused slightly for a little school in Brighton. I hope I pronounced this correctly, Moulscombe Primary, where the Academy's minister, Baroness Berridge, responded to a huge campaign supported by the NEU to pause the academisation, which I think sounds like a huge success so far.
Sure.
I think that the NEU involvement has been and should be pivotal against the academisation of schools in Britain. Can I just list these reasons? Because I think this is about members, teachers, but it's also about students, which affects all of us, doesn't it? If they're in an academy, oh, by the way, when the academy thing was first mooted, I thought, yay, we can get out of this national curriculum which weighs us down and doesn't respond to our students flexibly. We can have a more independent approach to education. What a load of nonsense that was, because really it was just a wolf in sheep's clothing. Because why would I trust it? It's come from the Tories, and I was right to be sceptical, because really all it's about is the following: undermined staff pay and conditions, more money to senior leadership. One head has been on 400,000 grand a year. More likely to be students are more likely to be taught by unqualified teachers. Don't we see that across education and the health service? Eroding professionalism. It's hugely damaging. As Chris Hedges talks about in the United States, the hollowing out of liberalism is that road, isn't it, to Trump really and fascism, because those institutions still have their names, but they don't really exist anymore. And I include in that universities and the judiciary, but I'm on my subject of schools at the moment. Those schools and academies have no recourse to local authority help, which damages those children, perhaps who've got special needs, who normally would benefit from that. And also those schools are less accountable to parents. Despite Ofsted's vice-like grip over schools, and believe me, if you're thinking about a problem with retention, I would pin it on Ofsted. UCL did a survey, and what did they find? There's no positive impact on GCSE results in schools that are academies. Post-16 provision is actually worse. And there's a widening gap, big surprise, for the disadvantaged students. Okay, so if Ofsted think it's nonsense, then why are they doing it? Because you're talking about, obviously, a huge transfer of assets. It's really crude. It's theft, isn't it? It's public land, buildings, staff, all have been invested in by the taxpayer that are now being sold off at a profit to private hands. And the thing that shocked me was 66 billion is the estimate of what is in the pipeline that's going to go from our students right into private hands. Can I just mention one primary school in southeast London? The school is split over 2 sites. In order to generate funds, the land was sold. It has a block of student flats on one of its sites. There's a leisure centre and there's AstroTurf. Those students, the school has to pay to allow students to use that leisure centre. It has to book or pay to allow primary school students to go on the AstroTurf. They have I just can't believe this, no outside space. Never mind greenfield and a few trees. No, for primaries, that's actually abuse. That's negligence. How they've got away with it is beyond me. And that's what we're to expect from academisation. The head of which who was connected to Gove, are we allowed to say that? I think I can clarify that if I read the article again. Big surprise, eh? So I expect the union to be a bulwark against that. I expected to look after my wages, my pension, but I really wanted to look after the students. And so far, I'm not knowledgeable enough to say to you, George, that my union has done that. I will look into that, and I can only go with what I know now. But I want to end up on a positive note. I got an email from the union this week to say that part of the NEU and the Cuba Solidarity campaign, there's going to be a meeting. So I'll put my name down. Kevin Courtney, who is the joint secretary of the NEU, called Cuba a beacon across Latin America and the Caribbean for education. So I'm going to get to go on a virtual meeting with teachers from Cuba who will hopefully teach us how to do things properly. Thank you.
Fantastic, a wonderful tour of the education front line. And of course, it goes without saying, we stand in absolute solidarity with those resisting academization, which is, as you put it, merely privatization. It's the theft of public resources for private purposes without proper democratic accountability, and almost certainly to the disadvantage of working class children in their education elsewhere in the boroughs when they're not in the academy, and perhaps even in the academy itself. I myself have fought many battles against academies, and indeed privatization, the ALMO projects of arm's length management organizations, trying to begin to push public housing out into first a semi-detached and then a detached relationship with democratic power in local authorities. I think it's Bob Crow who said, if you fight, you cannot guarantee that you will win, but if you don't fight, you can guarantee that you will lose. Thank you for that, Claire.
Thanks, George. Let's go to Dave. You there, Dave?
Oh, good evening.
Yes, Dave.
Oh, good evening, George. Nice to speak to you. Thank you very much for giving me time. I've just got a couple of things to say. They'll probably blend into one. You'll have to just excuse, it's been a tiring day, but it's a relief to be here, and a thank you to all comrades. We discussed regarding unions, regarding workplace rights, and sort of leading on, I would make a point that obviously unions have, as you say, fought for these rights, and up to a point lost way in some way. And from my experience, that the system now, say regarding the Her Majesty's courts and tribunals and access with legal aid as such, it's actually still very much often stacked in favour of the employer and the larger organisation than against the individual, who often, once losing a job, I mean, it can be a very lengthy process. It was 15 months, but I would hope that we could see something where that would open up, so we could, obviously everybody could know rights and sort of, and that would sort of, excuse me, lead me on to sort of one point which you've covered really well earlier, George, and I just wanted to share with yourself and all comrades here that I think it's vitally important that we recognise the role of, as you say, the unwaged, the unemployed, the people in desperate situations, also the unpaid carers. Since I was dismissed winning the case, I've been doing a bit of voluntary work, and I'm a registered carer myself. I do know, and I've spoken to many carers groups, that many carers themselves don't always have access to a voice or the resources to actually speak out. But that, I think, makes it more of a duty that we do speak out for the unpaid carers right across the country who give so much. They will never stop doing it. They do it out of love, but obviously holiday pay, workers' rights, minimum wage doesn't exist. And many of them also have health needs, like I've seen, and some don't even access services for themselves. With what you're saying, would this proposal that some form of union to include everybody, not just workers, but others as part of the community? And what I would say to finish is, the positive is, it's like a quote saying, it's not failing because we've not succeeded at everything I've tried to do, but you fail if you don't even try. So
Yes, quite so.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. The exemplar now is the RMT. Nothing can happen in the railway industry, particularly in the London Underground, but not exclusively, without having to deal fairly with the RMT. There's a reason why Bob Crow was the most popular union leader in the country at the time of his death. I've got to concede that he was one of the few trade union leaders that actually had a persona which resonated with the public. But everybody respected Bob because at the end of the day, he was doing his job. His job was to defend the workers in the railway industry, and he manifestly, plainly did it. And the unfair dismissals, discrimination in the workplace, low pay, all of these things were banished by 100%, more or less, union membership in the railways. Now, of course, there are some industries where the pace of change, the extent of change in those industries have made it more difficult for the unions, but you've got to try. And unless there's evidence that you're trying, people will presume that you're planning to fail. And in many cases, that is true. I talked earlier about the absurd affection in trade union circles for the European Union, an utterly absurd, ideologically perverse attachment. But the reason for that was they thought that they could get some things cheaply out of the European Union that they ought to have been fighting for themselves with their own employers and with the organized labor movement as a whole. But they stopped trying. That's the truth of it. Secondly, hasn't this last 4 or 5, 6 months nearly shown the perversity of an economy in which all the most important workers turn out to be the least paid workers? What kind of an economy is? I mean, an economy should be the very reverse of that, that the workers that are most needed should be looked after best. But we've discovered, some of us knew it, of course, but everyone's now discovered that the key workers that we were all clapping for are the people that are paid the least and the people whose work we can perfectly well live without, continue to be paid the most. And that is essential injustice is central to the project of the Workers' Party of Britain. And we will never give up fighting to reverse that.
Thanks, George. I've got a good contribution here in the chat that I'm going to read out from Ricky. He says, there needs to be an attitude change towards unions. I've been in the union since I was 17, and the change in people's thoughts towards the unions is now atrocious. I've even had colleagues on the docks where I work say, I'll join the union when I need them. I think we need to push for belief back in the unions and what they can do as a whole. And he then also asks there, will we be looking at aligning ourselves with the union as the party?
Well, we align ourselves with all unions, and we don't expect them in return to align themselves with us. That's not how it works. We have to win influence in the trade unions. And the way to do that is, as I said earlier, the quality of our work, our fidelity to our workmates, our fidelity to the integrity of the union. We should always intervene in arguments going on in unions. We should not hide the fact that we are members of the Workers' Party of Britain, but we will not be sectarian in any way in regard to that. We'll work with if there are still such a thing, conservative trade unionists, never mind trade unionists of other political stripes that call themselves left-wing, because that's not what unions are for. Unions will not lead a revolutionary transformation of society. That's our job. But unions will strengthen the working class, give it confidence to take the steps forward necessary for that transformation.
Yeah, that's great. Union is where the working class can learn how to fight for itself. So
Yes.
That's an important thing that people should have access to. Let's go to Georgie.
Hiya.
Hello,
Hi.
Georgie. Nice to see you looking healthy.
Oh, thank you. The cough stopped now.
Good.
I put on here, I'm not sure that the younger generation know about unions and or even want to join them. A present company accepted, because a couple of weeks ago, well, week before last, myself and two comrades went to Peterborough, ordered a Costa, and me as being me, I just asked this guy, are you a member of a union? And he looked so nonplussed. He didn't know what on earth I was talking about. And I'm just thinking that is our fault, but it's the union's fault. They're not recruiting, I don't think. And I'm sort of tying in, as usual, I'll be a big ramble, but I'm tying in with a lot of what you said. The dog's not going to bark this time, though. I've got serious concerns about the trade unionists, a bit like you were saying, that I think in the EU referendum talk, the Brexit talk the other week, you mentioned about them being wined and dined and all the rest of it. And so they went for the pro-Remain vote. And I remember that I think it was actually Unite had 10 reasons to stay in the EU. And what they'd actually done is they put all the struggles that we as the workers had won, 10 of them at least anyway, and claimed it was all the European Union that had done that, which was total rubbish. But also the unionists seem to be cozying up with management rather than supporting the workers. And that is not a good thing at all. And they seem more hell-bent on selling famous insurance and will writing services, which are all very good, but they need to be supporting our struggles. This is a time now where they could get a massive recruitment drive on, but we're hearing nothing from the unions, apart from maybe RMT. I've heard nothing at all. For myself, I'm a member now of the Royal College of Nurses just because they help me with my revalidation that I have to do every 3 years. And with the COVID, they've been absolutely brilliant. They've got this special whistleblowing service that you can contact if you need to. I've not had to do that. There's so much else I could say, but I'll shut up because you've got loads of other people. But we need,
No,
they need to recruit. They need to get out there. We need to help them, but they need to stop the bad press that unions have had from the past for whatever reason.
that's a brilliant contribution. It's a kind of self-hatred. I don't know another way to put it. And it's particularly hard to bear coming from Unite, because it's very hard for me to believe, could be true, but it's hard for me to believe that Len McCluskey is a supporter of the European Union. And that goes for some of the key lieutenants of Len McCluskey, some of whom I know very well and know that they are not remotely supporters of the European Union. And to pray in aid of the European Union, gains which the British working class made on their own, in many cases, maybe most cases, before Britain even joined the European Union, is an outrage. And it speaks to a kind of, well, maybe it's nicer to say a dramatic loss of confidence rather than self-hatred. It is something that has to end. Sweetheart arrangements between unions and management have to end, and they will end when the workers demand that they end. Don't forget that all of these people, even Len McCluskey, have to be elected. They have, the members of the ruling executives of these unions have to be elected. And if current of members, and we would be part of that current, is vocally demanding in the clearest way and winning support and friends around our demands, then either these leaders have to adapt to the new atmosphere amongst the members, or they have to make way for new leaders. And that's the long-term view, long-term project that we have. So if you are in a union, in a workplace, and a vacancy occurs for shop steward, go for it. Branch secretary, go for it. Delegate to conference, go for it. Attendance at a virtual meeting like Claire talked about earlier, go for it. Get yourselves known in the unions, your name known, your face known, your political standpoint known. That's the way we'll grow.
Thanks, George. Let's go to Viviana. Hello, Viviana, you there? Oh, I seem to have lost her.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, very faintly though.
Yeah. Speak and let's see whether or not the connection works. No, sorry, Viviana, I don't think it's working well enough.
Okay,
There
right.
you go.
Oh, we could hear you there.
That's okay.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I think that's not going to work, I'm afraid. Okay, let's go to John.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah, okay. Continue, Viviana. Make your contribution. Oh, no, it's not working.
Right. If you can.
Right, okay. John, are you ready to unmute yourself?
Unmute. There we are. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, yes, thanks, John.
Hiya. Hi, George. Just had like the one quick question. Union representatives always have to be accountable to their membership. So what kind of reforms, if any, should unions make in order to ensure they truly represent the interests of their members?
Well, first you've got to get the members ready to demand accountability. And nothing concentrates the mind more wonderfully than the knowledge that you are facing re-election. And that's the best form of accountability. Our position should be that every position of leadership in the trade union should be subject to election and recall. Our position is that the trade union leaders' wages and conditions must bear a decent relationship, at least, to the wages and conditions of the people who pay their wages. In other words, a closing of the gap. There has been, if I may use the word, it's a long one, an embourgeoisification of the trade union tops. They live lives and earn money and have access to property and cars and so on that runs a very serious risk of taking them so far distant from the lives of their members that the danger exists of them beginning to see things from the other side's standpoint rather than the standpoint that they're paid to represent. So elections, re-elections, no position should go uncontested where we think that the office bearer concerned has not done as good a job as they ought to. It doesn't need to be acrimonious. It doesn't need to be personal. Indeed, it would be wrong in both cases for it to be acrimonious and personal. It's political. It's about whether the union is doing what it says on the tin. That's what we insist on. Thanks, John.
Thanks, George. I've just seen that Viviana did put a bit of her contribution into the chat here, so I'm going to read it out.
Okay.
Good evening. I think that this is a crisis that more than ever requires a rethinking of the economic model, back to production, real skills and knowledge, away from financial speculation, long overdue since the 2008 crisis. I think it is the only way to turn the actual crisis into an opportunity. It's a very good contribution.
Well, I'm sorry she didn't get to make that vocally, because it's exactly correct. It's exactly where we stand. One of the reasons why we supported Brexit is because we believe in the reindustrialization of Britain. And the reindustrialization would simply not be possible, not be legal, if we had remained in the European Union with all its competition rules and rules on tendering and so on. I don't need to revisit those. But we believe there's no future in selling ice cream cones to tourists and playing numbers games on computers in the square mile in the city of London. We need to make things. And I often come across people who are skeptical about that. As if, I mean, let me look around me now. Everything I see was manufactured, was made by somebody. It just wasn't made by us. And we have to get back to a situation where a decent proportion of what we use and need is made by us. That will bring workers together in manufacturing. It will encourage union membership. It will develop class consciousness and solidarity, out of which will come people who believe, as we believe, that socialism is the best system of organization. And that's why we want industrialization. It's why we had to support Brexit. And it's time, of course, long past time, to question the model of finance capital, of financialization, of the role of derivatives, of the casino economics of the City of London. You know, we're not going to make all bankers redundant or throw them all in jail, although one or two of them should be in jail. But we are going to insist upon, if we were ever able to influence that, a vastly different relationship of the financial services industry to the manufacturing and service industries in the country.
Yeah, thanks very much, George. I think it's an interesting thing, this, you know, people can have this idea that the world around us is something like the inside of an iTunes store, where it's all, you know, the future for us now is it's all smooth white surfaces and it's all futuristic and touchscreen stuff like that. You know, when you go into an iTunes store and it's supposed to be very impressive, you know, but obviously the reality is, if you go into an iTunes store and it's being fitted out and the shop fitters are in there, you know, that's like an illusion that's being made by, you know, actual sort of work, and there's all sorts of dust and muck around everywhere while it's being created. You know, that's the reality, not the fantasy. We've got to remember that. Let's go to Rob, Rob K.
Yes, Rob.
You there, Rob? No, can't hear him. No, I think he must have gone off. Okay, Fran.
Evening, everyone. Evening, George.
Hi, Fran.
My point tonight, I just wanted to kind of say something positive about this union situation. The way I see it, there's a lot of people like in the chat. Nobody can see this on the stream end, but we've got a chat going internally with everyone here, and people are umming and ahhing about what the unions will be like. Now, the way I see it is, I imagine there's like the workplace is like a dry field, and there's a huge dam, and in that dam is full of water. Well, that's socialism, and we're the people that are pointing at the dam saying there's loads of water, and it's there, and it's factually there. And the unions at the minute are people who are coming up with some other situation to try and feed this field and drench the crops. So, you know, in that analogy, we are the ones with the truth on our side. That is what I'm wanting to say. So we as members of this party should be, like you said, right in the mix of the unions. And it's not something that we have to and ah and decide what it's going to look like first. I'd just like to bring attention to, I don't think he's here tonight, but John up in the Wirral, bus driver John, he's in the moment right now, having union struggles. He's a rep for his depot, and we as a party should be giving John all the support we can right now in the moment. It's not a theoretical discussion about what a union is going to look like. We just have to support John and help him build his struggle. And from that, the struggle in your workplace will get easier. So I think we just have to do that as a party. And another quick tip, which you brought up in your speech, was convince, well, don't convince, but just let workers know. I think a lot of people are anti-union these days because of the affiliation to the Labour Party and all this wokeness from the Labour Party. One thing you can do is tell your colleagues to stay in the union, but stop their donations to the Labour Party. That should be a key point. And on that point as well, I wanted to ask if our idea would be to, you know, when we affiliate, will we be getting that donation from the unions to help them and us fight together? You know, that's what we need to transfer into. And that's me anyway.
Well, in an ideal world, of course, the trade unions would give us some of their political funds. That won't happen for a long time, if ever. but they can start by giving some of their political funds to some of the political campaigns that we are involved in and will increasingly be involved in when this lockdown is finally over. The campaign of our comrades in the West Midlands, for example, for free bus fares for our children, which exists in other parts of the country, but not, oddly, in Labour-controlled West Midlands. Now, every worker, not everyone, but most workers, have got children, they've got grandchildren. It's in their interest for this campaign to be successful. And there will be others. The fight that's on at British Airways and Bentley and many other places now. There are industrial fights breaking out everywhere. They just don't get much coverage in the mainstream media, but we have to cover them. We have to make sure that everybody knows about all these hundreds of thousands of workers, by the way, who are in the process of being sacked and then rehired on inferior wages and conditions. Because most working people will see that as a complete injustice. Most working people will see that as something that could easily happen to them. And therefore, it's in their interest to stand with those to whom it's already happening, not least because if it can be stopped there, it will not visit you as an attack on a later occasion. You're quite right. There's nothing theoretical about this. The theory is long ago written and clear. The theory is that workers are stronger if they combine than they would be if they don't combine. And any fool can see that. And we have to remake these arguments all over again. Thanks, Fran.
Thanks, George. Let's go to Joshua. You there, Joshua?
Yeah, very much so. How is everyone doing?
Fine,
Good.
Joshua, thank you.
Yes. Okay. We might have been over this ground before, George, and I hate to sound cliched or repetitive, but when I get liberals, people who think they are left wing, and they bang on about how the EU protects our rights, when I quote to them that the EU utilises cheap labour from Eastern Europe in order to undercut wages, they accuse me of being a UKIP sympathiser, and I swear I have never voted UKIP. I did vote Brexit Party in the European Parliament elections in 2019, but only because our vote was not respected. But what specific European law, if you can remember, or if you can maybe not quote, but generally remember, what specific European Union law undercuts trade unions in your opinion? Maybe not deliberately per se, but I just need, because I am pestered for specific examples rather than generic information.
Well, all of them. The free movement of labour is the most egregious and obvious method of driving down wages and conditions that is possible to imagine. A Bulgarian worker's average hourly rate of pay is £1. And so if you offer the Bulgarian worker maybe even less than the minimum wage, which is the case in some places, but even the minimum wage, that at the very least keeps the minimum wage lower than it would otherwise be, and keeps more of our jobs on the minimum wage, because a large pool of reserve labour is available from Eastern Europe and Central Europe to work for the lowest possible wages. Now, again, there's nothing theoretical about that. It's obvious. If you and I were shop stewards negotiating with a manager who could tell us that outside the door were 500 people ready to do the work for less than we were demanding, then our negotiating, bargaining position is grievously undermined. So that would be the most obvious rejoinder, but there are others. The requirement to allow competition for all services is, of course, itself a depressant of wages, because it means that, again, if you and I are representing, say, the British Railway Company, but we must open up our lines to competition from abroad, and that competition, that competitive bid is lower than ours, then how else is it going to be lower if not by depressing the wages and conditions of the workers in that industry? So all the competition laws, competitive tendering laws, and free movement itself all represent a depressor of wages and conditions in the economy in which they are being applied. And you don't need to look in the crystal ball. You can read the book. You can show what has happened in Britain during the 44 years or whatever that we were in the European Union. Before we joined the European Union, unions were king. Now, after 40 odd years, unions are nothing. Before we joined, the public sector and the public services, nationalized industries, and so on, have all been decimated by the neoliberal economics which the European Union exemplifies, has built into its constitution, its articles of association. So there are plenty of such arguments. But I think you'll find, Josh, that these arguments will begin to fade. Fade as we leave, as we leave the European Union.
Thank you, George.
Sorry, go on. Yes, Rob.
I've got a good little comment here from Jason in the chat. He says, too many influential people in the trade union movement conflate freedom of movement to be internationalism. It isn't, and it never could be, whilst the control of that movement is through capitalist ideals. I think that's a good point.
Very good point. That's the opposite of internationalism. Tell the people drowning in the Mediterranean right now how internationalist the European Union is.
Exactly. I've got a message here that's been sent from our member John, who wasn't able to join us for this meeting tonight, but he's sent me a good contribution here, and I'm going to read it out. I'm all too familiar with the struggles of workers in my workplace. Sadly, we aren't just fighting against management, but fighting against the very people that are supposed to be representatives. Why do you think a lot of these reps have become mouthpieces for their employers? Do you think that's precisely why a lot of members now only use the union for insurance purposes, to protect them from disciplinaries at work, rather than to organise and agitate collectively? And finally, I recall the furlough scheme being celebrated by my union branch as some sort of victory, and that workers would essentially be paid to do nothing. Hasn't the scheme shown its flaws? The idea that big foreign-owned multinationals have been able to claim vast amounts of public money to then cut jobs. Do you think some of these big companies should have shouldered the cost themselves? They can afford it, and if they were claiming to be heading towards a cliff edge, even a few weeks into lockdown and before the furlough scheme, like a lot of them were, doesn't that demonstrate gross mismanagement and a systemic problem that ought to be addressed by the companies and not by the public purse?
Well, we support the furlough, of course, without which millions of workers would have been in catastrophic conditions. And it is a testimony to the weakness that the government felt that they introduced the furlough in the first place. They didn't fancy 10 million British workers with no wages and only the streets to go. So in a sense, it was a compliment to the British people, that the employers and the government felt they had to do something. The limitations of the furlough, of course, are obvious. 80% rather than 100%. Only until October rather than until the virus was defeated. And now, as John infers or implies, the use of the breathing space gained by these companies, by the furlough, to have taken all the government's money and then sack the workers anyway when the furlough begins to run out. As to the first part of John's question, we shouldn't be too harsh. John's had a particularly bitter and shameful experience in his current dispute, and the way that the union has behaved in his depot is absolutely shameful. And John is a very great credit to us and has our absolute solidarity. But there are, of course, many shop stewards, thousands of them around the country, who are genuine, sincere defenders of the working class. And it's not their fault that the balance of power in the economy and in the society is currently very much against trade union militancy. But there are equally a significant number of trade union leaders, and even further down, as John has found, who opt for the path of least resistance. Obviously, it's much easier to be a trade unionist that collaborates with the management than it is to be a trade unionist that confronts the management, where confrontation is required and justified. And there are some, John's been unfortunate to have met them, there are some that are absolutely sincerely committed to working class interests. And we call on them to take a look at the Workers' Party of Britain as being a party that better represents their aspirations, their interests, than the misnamed Labour Party does.
Thanks, George. Let's go to Glenn. You there, Glenn?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, Glenn, very clearly.
Yes, hiya. I just wanted to touch on something that was alluded to earlier by yourself, George, with reference to the kind of depression of wage levels, because of course the other thing that massively depresses wage levels for ordinary working people, aside from the lack of control over the movement of workers and free movement of working people from one country to another, from more impoverished, less developed countries to another to artificially lower the wages, is unemployment, which of course capitalism and capitalists have an ideological incentive to maintain unemployment, because it creates a permanent body of potential workers, a permanent army of potential labour who are deprived of income, who have no guaranteed income, who will happily work the moment there's a job available, even if it's for pitiful wages, because it's less than, or it's more than what they would get now, and it's a stable form of income which they currently don't have. No matter how pitiful the wages, it will be better than the meager handouts they get from the government, and it will be a better circumstance for them. So it keeps the wage level low by creating desperation for work, no matter how awful and low paid the work may be. It also weakens union activity, because the fewer people there are to be employed, the fewer people there can be in a union, and because they can use them as scab labour if they need to. On that note, really, I was going in the same way that people from foreign countries and like the likes of Eastern European immigrants often don't join unions because it makes them less attractive. it's equally true of people fresh off the unemployment rolls and fresh off the benefit scheme. I was going to ask on that front, actually, do you think that there should be like kind of organizations of some form, either affiliated to the party or otherwise linked to the party or from the union, set up to kind of represent the rights of unemployed people and, you know, be a voice for that? And because we've talked a lot about obviously working people, we would do with the Workers' Party, of course, but they are intrinsically tied to the other people who want to work, who need to work, but can't. And their rights are routinely ignored, even though they have it worse than many working people, and as much as being food insecure, you know, on the brink of homelessness continually, not being able to afford to heat their homes, feed their children, you know, even get electricity in many cases.
Well, very well said. And of course, the reserve army of labour that existed in Britain before the free movement of labour was the then principal tool or club with which the employers and the employing class could dampen wages. It was up against a countervailing force of trade union militancy, consciousness, and numbers. That has changed. The reserve army of labour of the last period, since the constitution of the European Union codified the free movement of cheap labour from poorer European countries into richer countries, that became the main reserve army of labour. Now that reserve army of labour, although I see Boris Johnson's about to flood the labour market with no less than 3 million Hong Kong Chinese, I don't know where they're going to live, where they're going to work. We'll see if that ever comes to pass. And what China's response to that will be is, of course, a subject of ongoing speculation and debate. But the only thing you didn't mention, and in your excellent contribution, I will mention. This, of course, demonstrates one of the many inherent contradictions within capitalism, because if you've got millions of people unemployed, you've got millions of people that can't buy the goods and services that your economy is producing. And if the larger that pool of unemployed, insecure, low-paid workers, the less domestic demand there will be in the economy for the goods and services that these workers and other workers are producing. It's another example which we pray in aid of our case that a planned economy is vastly superior to this hit and miss, hidden hand, so-called free market capitalism that we live under. Thanks very much for that contribution.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself there. Colin has just put a good contribution in the chat. I'm going to ask him to unmute. He wants to put that across. You there, Colin? Hello? Yeah. Can you unmute yourself, Colin? There we go. I think that's done it. I know you've muted yourself again. There we go. Okay. Unmute. There we go. It's done. You've done it. It's muted again. Sorry, Colin, I'm just going to read your contribution out. Okay.
We need a workshop, Rob,
Yeah.
to make sure everyone's proficient on these things.
Yeah, Colin usually is okay with it, I think. I'm going to read it out. The problem with the furlough scheme is that the money from government public money has been channeled through companies and employees, only it would have been much better for workers to have received direct payments from the government without having to go through their employer. I think that's a fair point.
Absolutely. Even Donald Trump did that. Not enough and not often enough and not enough money, but he at least gave the money to the workers. Our government has given the money to the employers.
Yeah, thank you. Jason has put another good contribution here. He said, I've seen one or two criticisms of trade unions. I think they are far from perfect, but as a trade unionist for over 30 years, I can say that they're the best means for the working class to collectivise, to learn and to fight to improve their lot than any other means at their disposal. They can only become what we wish them to be if we all join a union, get involved, go to branch meetings, become reps, be delegates at conferences and become part of their executives. So thanks.
Very good.
Jason.
Excellent. Excellent. That's the right spirit.
Okay. Well, I think that is most of I think we've got through what the contributions that we've put through there. And so I think I will wrap the meeting up for the evening, unless, George, if you want to make any further comments.
No. My voice is running out, actually.
Okay.
I have to talk all day and every day, so I'd be glad to get off 3 minutes early.
Yeah, go and rest your voice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, to everyone who's been watching online, please do get involved with the party. If you like what you hear, if you like the content of the discussion that we've been having, go to the website workerspartyofbritain.org and sign up and get involved. And to everyone else who is a member, you might not be participating in the meeting tonight, but you'd be very welcome to join our members meeting. That's a private meeting that happens every Wednesday evening. So that'll be tomorrow night. And to everyone else who is here in the chat, hope to see you all there too. So thanks everyone. It's been a good meeting tonight and good evening.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you.